Hey, everybody, it's Emily, and my good friend Eric Peterson is here with me. And this is the Occult Tennis Podcast number 9, and we are making a change. Previously, this show has been available only on Rockfin, and we have decided to try to make it YouTube friendly and put the bulk of the show here. There just aren't as many, I was under the impression that Rockfin was very sports heavy, but it's like fantasy football and then like wrestling and UFC heavy. There doesn't appear to be much action sports wise over there otherwise. And I think that, we say interesting things and we want more people to listen to them if they're interested in. And I want to push back a little bit at the traditional tennis community, particularly the one that's here on YouTube. And I want more people to become aware of the questions around tennis. So we're going to try YouTube here and see what happens. And all of the spicy bit, if there's any, will be sort of at like the post show over on Rockfin. So anywho, those are the new, that's the updated way we're going to be doing this. We'll be doing it just once in a while as we see fit, because both of us are pretty busy with work, but that's where we're at. Eric Peterson, how are you?
I'm good, Emily. Yeah, I've been really busy. Not necessarily with work per se, but I've been doing a lot more things recently, a lot of different projects going on, art, creativity wise, just creating things and, having a new house. There's so much to do. So I just kind of been consumed with that. And I haven't paid a whole lot of attention to everything else that's going on in the world, which has been nice, except for tennis.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I'm just really balancing out the amount of activities and engagement I do online and in the real world. And it's been so heavily skewed for quite a long time now. And now it's kind of like, okay, like I'm trying to do as many things as I can away from the computer. Obviously, have a lot of things to do here as well. But I'm trying to balance that out. And then also just being honest with myself and coming to terms about like which things that I do that are actually like, when I don't want to necessarily call them work or not work, but like which things that I do that are like part of my making a living and which things are really like more things that I do because I enjoy them or because I want to do them, right? Just for the experience or the fun of it or whatever it is, and balancing those things out as well. And so the natural endpoint of that is less time on the computer.
Well, there's making a living and then there's living, right?
Correct.
And quite often those two things are separate for most people.
Absolutely.
At least they are for me.
Yeah. All right. So let's do this because I'm promising tennis and I'm sure that the great not that many people care about our work-life balance. I wanted to start off today with the biggest story in tennis for the last 4 to 6 weeks now, maybe a little bit longer, but they're, really the videos have just started to die down in the last week or so, has been the retirement of Roger Federer and everybody celebrating him and his career and his legacy. And I think all of that is perfectly valid and on almost every level, well-deserved. And I also think that, they're not just celebrating Roger's achievements on the court. They're also celebrating him as a human being and as a legacy. And I think when you do that, which is what we do as a culture, we don't just assess people's performance and that's it. Then it's necessary to take a more holistic look at it and ask some questions about his legacy. And I am going to sort of center my commentary around a question I posed on my favorite tennis commentator's YouTube channel. He does these things called mailbags, where he answers questions or responds to comments. And he has in the past answered or responded to something I've said. And I knew this would be a long shot. I worked on asking the question in a very diplomatic way, and I posted it. And it got some responses from other people in the comment section. I wasn't surprised when he didn't address it, but I was surprised to find that at this point, the comment has been deleted from from the stream, which tells me they don't want anybody looking at or thinking about that, right? Which he doesn't. And so, I'm going to talk about it here. I will say this about Gil Gross. He is my favorite tennis analyst to watch, like anywhere. I think he's the best pure tennis analyst out there. And I'm not super critical of him for this. Like, I don't like when people, delete things that way. But for the most part, he sticks strictly to talking about tennis or very tennis focused things. He has a few times wandered off into comments about medical procedures or the war and who he stands with. And he's like 23. So how he could possibly understand enough about the world to say something like, I stand with Ukraine is ridiculous. But he's young. And so I forgive him for that. He mostly doesn't. He's not one of these people that made, smearing videos about Novak or, anything like that. He made comments. His focus, and I'm sure he'd admit this, is he wants a career in tennis analysis, and he will do whatever he needs to do that. That is his focus. That is what he cares about. And all of his behavior is in line with that. And in some ways I can respect that, right? He doesn't claim to be some seeker of truth or anything like that. So I don't hold him, to the same standard that I hold people who say they are on a search for truth. But the question I had said was, and I waited till several weeks after Roger retired to ask it. Now that we've had several weeks to, celebrate Federer's career and legacy, and it is, well-deserved, I have some questions. I said, I have been at times, I've cheered for Roger and been appreciative and in some ways a fan, even though he was never my favorite player, right? I also have, he seems to be a nice guy in a lot of ways, but I also have questions and concerns about things that he has been a part of, sort of off of the court, but in some ways it bleeds into on the court. And so I have two main criticisms of Roger's legacy. One of them isn't really even about Roger, and then the other sort of is. So I'm gonna explain this and talk about this a little bit here, since it didn't get answered. I would have loved to hear what he had to say. I was not surprised that wasn't. But I will say this: Roger Federer was an excellent tennis player and really joyful to watch. It was nice to it was, hard if you were rooting for Andy Roddick, which at the time that I was. But I think that almost anybody would agree that he's the most elegant looking tennis player in terms of how pretty it is to watch his game, right? And for a period of time in the early 2000s, he was clearly far better than everybody else on almost every occasion. Right. And that's a true meritorious achievement. And I acknowledge and celebrate that. So after everything I have to say, I'm going to give you, if you have anything you want to say, please jump in. Right. I think you would agree about that, right?
Yeah. Certainly I've enjoyed watching Roger play over the years. There were times where I was really rooting for Roger and I loved watching him. And then there were times where he really frustrated me because I wanted to see anybody else win besides this guy. And after a while, him winning, just finally Nadal came along, and it wasn't too long after Roger had gotten started that Nadal comes along and really poses a challenge. And then Djokovic shortly after Nadal. And so, it made it interesting, but I don't know. I had mixed feelings about Roger over the years.
Yeah,
but he's certainly deserving.
For me, it was hard because I was an Andy Roddick fan, right? And Roger, some people say he ruined the career of Andy Roddick, Juan Carlos Ferrer, Leighton Hewitt, maybe, that these were all people who would have won many more, Grand Slams. But to me, no, that's merit. That's the way it goes, right? None of those people have anything negative to say about, jokingly, they'll be like, yeah, that fucker ruined my career or whatever, but they all respect him. And to his credit, those people whose career he's ruined, they all like him very much, right? And so I think he had a lot of goodwill with the other players, despite the fact that he dominated so seriously. Now, I think the argument could be made that early in his domination, the tennis field was very weak, right, in comparison to what it became later. And so, you know, he was just better. It's kind of like the way Simone Biles has been winning. She's never been seriously challenged, right? And so it's different than when you watch a battle and someone's able to overcome the difficult battle every time. And, you know, Gil Gross, in one of his videos about Roger, commented, and I felt like this was a pretty astute observation. Like, said that he liked to watch Roger play for the joy of playing. And so when Roger would get into battles, he didn't enjoy watching Roger battle. He enjoyed watching Roger dominate, not because, oh, he thinks it's great, he's dominating, but the kind of shots he could pull off when he knew he was going to win. It would get very artistic. It would get just flashy and joyful and fun, but he wasn't fun to watch battle. And I agree with that. Like, it was not actually a cute look sometimes watching him panic when he did not have an answer for Djokovic or Nadal or, you know, or whatnot. And so it's a different, like Gil said, like he loves watching like Nadal or Djokovic battle. He loves watching them battle against each other or anyone else, but he did not really enjoy watching Roger battle, right? And he was talking about this in terms of like, okay, now Roger's future is in exhibition tennis, and that might really be that might be his best, you know, his sort of best way to display his skill set, right? Because he definitely has that Peter Pan, very balletic, but some power behind it too, kind of style. But yeah, it was not cute when he would really be almost panicking. Like you could see the distress in him. It wasn't cute, dude.
I feel like Bjorn Borg was in many respects the same, where Bjorn Borg, people loved him when he was dominating, but when he was battling, like they didn't like it. So McEnroe posed, you know, here always there's going to be that person or people who come along, no matter what field it is, but especially in tennis, you can see this, where a person like Federer, and he's not unique or special because there's been many before him and there will be others after him, but they raise the game to a new level.
Yes.
And they're just naturally gifted in a way that is difficult. You know, Roger got by so easily,
right,
with his grace and his inherent talent. But when he started to make the people playing him get better, then he didn't know how to handle it. So when a Nadal or a Djokovic comes knocking on the door, trying to beat him for the first time, trying to prove something, right? He's raising the level of tennis of everyone around him.
Yep.
And yet it's difficult for Roger to raise his own game when he really needs it. And it's frustrating. So I think that was a hindrance in his career, right? Yeah. His inability to go beyond what he was already at, which was beyond most people at the time.
Yeah, I mean, it was like when Nadal started coming up, it was a couple of years where he was really just having tremendous success on clay. And it took him 2 or 3 more years before he could really start to challenge Roger on the other surfaces. But once he did, then he took over the rivalry, right? And the only time that Roger ever regained any kind of upper hand was in 2017 when he had that comeback after a year off. And he sort of had a resurgent level of energy, and Nadal was going through like a more challenging time with his body and his confidence and whatnot. But yeah, like I think it's very, you know, when you dominate for so long and then suddenly there's challenge, like you can't even say that, oh, the person couldn't stand up to the challenge, like because they're not capable or they're weak. It's just something you're not used to. Like that's a huge adjustment when like you've been, you know, miles ahead for so long, and suddenly like you're not used to having to even care about who's behind you, right? And so it's a huge adjustment. And I think the thing, so, and you kind of alluded to this, like after a while it got boring watching him win, right? And what was more boring, and this came along later, like at first, you know, when Rafa started beating him and Djokovic started to, okay, you have your favorite player, you root for them or whatever. But this like obsession with Roger Federer continued, which, okay, like that's a magical quality he has. I'm not going to fault him for that. But and I would say like him winning everything, like it's merit. You can't, okay, like maybe it feels boring to watch, but I wasn't offended by that or put off. What I was put off was that by this obsession that everybody always wanted him to win. And I talked about this in the question that I posed. I remember it was 2018. Me and my mom had been to Indian Wells. We had been to the semifinals, and seen Roger Federer the day before, and who he played, and then we'd also watched Del Potro and who he played, which I can't remember who their opponents were right now, but they made the final. We didn't have tickets to the final, so the next day we were in a restaurant in Palm Springs with lots of people watching tennis, right? And this was when, Del Potro had been on his very long road back from so many injuries, right? And people were rooting against Del Potro. They weren't just cheering for Roger Federer. They were actively rooting against Del Potro. And that particular case, like I would have gotten it if it was Djokovic or Nadal or Murray or someone who he's had on, but like how anybody could root against Del Potro in that situation, right? The triumph of finally getting somewhere close to regaining the level he once had before at that 9 years of injuries since his last big win against Roger. Like it felt sick to me. Like it felt like an emblem of the sickness of our society. It would be fine to just root for Roger and not say anything, about, Juan Martín del Potro, but to cheer when he misses that way, not just cheer when Roger has a great shot, but like cheer when he misses. It felt gross to me. It felt like almost like the same thing that we're starting to see with certain aspects of cancel culture and people applauding when someone's life is ruined. It felt like connected to the same disgusting urge in people. And that was something I had not seen elicited in quite that way in tennis before.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the way it was almost as if it was impolite or against some sort of tennis etiquette to root for anyone but Roger if Roger was playing.
Right. I mean,
and what you're saying is true. Like here's Nadal in the middle. So you have Djokovic, who everyone just roots against, right? For no reason. Just, they have reasons. But of course, he was always painted in the media as the guy to root against, to not like, to question, and Roger was always the one that the media painted as untouchable. You can't say anything bad about him. He is the king. And then
Nadal was always the one in the middle who everyone respected. Even if Roger was their favorite or whatnot, they could appreciate the way he battled and things like that. He's the respected warrior.
And so you have this trinity that was set up by the media.
Right.
Because, all three of these guys certainly had the talent to be where they're at.
Right.
But the media exploited that. And I think in a large part was responsible for what you're describing. The reaction of the fans, the energy in the stands is also a reflection of the commentators, because the commentators shape, your perception of things so much. And I find when I watch tennis without them, it's just not the same anymore. You don't get sucked into the drama that is tennis.
Yeah, I mean, there's certain things I like better about watching without commentary and other things I don't. But it was very it's something I always found a little bit like at first boring, right? That everyone rooted for Roger Federer all of the time, right? And always wanted him to win in every situation. And then it moved into this place where actually this feels sick to me, right? When the rooting against Del Potro in that circumstance, like it was like the sports version of like the just Trump derangement syndrome or the Biden derangement syndrome in whatever way, kind of thing. When I say Biden derangement syndrome, what I mean is like people who refuse to acknowledge that he has dementia, right? Kind of thing. And then the Trump derangement syndrome goes both ways. But yeah, you know, so that was one. So this is what I'm talking about, I guess, in terms of like just the tennis, the on-court aspect of the game. There's no doubt he's been a huge influence on raising the level of tennis, making it very popular worldwide, right? And you know, creating a scenario where like it really, I think almost all athletes out there, right? I've heard, you know, the top athletes in other sports say that like tennis is really the hardest because you're just out there for fucking ever by yourself, right? That fitness level cannot, of those top players, cannot be questioned, and that amount of just like, you don't have a team to depend on. Other sports that are out there that long are team oriented, right? And you could say that there are sports like gymnastics or ski jumping or diving that are technically like harder or scarier than tennis, but they're also short, right? Like if you're suffering for the work that goes into them. But in terms of the actual, you know, how you play the game and win, it's, you know, it's created a lot of energy and noise around tennis in a very different way than it used to be there, right? And that's undeniable. And when
not to mention the schedule is pretty grueling.
The schedule is grueling, right? The schedule is grueling. It's year round. It requires more travel. Like, you know, they just make this loop around the globe constantly. So there's a lot. I mean, there's definitely, he's such an important figure. And I think not being honest about things about him actually diminishes that, right? There is no question about his effect on the sport and his ability as a player. Right. And he always displayed very good sportsmanship on the court. Like I did never see any shisty moves from him. Apparently, when he was younger, he used to get mad and smash rackets. But like once he stopped at a certain young age, kind of 19 or 20, he stopped doing that. And then, you know, he was a good role model on the court for sure. Like, you know, that I don't think that's debatable. As far as his own personality, when I would see him interviewed, he seems like a nice person. He seems to have a lot of different interests and can chat about, you know, music and other sports. And, you know, he has funny stories and he's kind of, you know, got a good sense of humor, and that stuff is all true. Right. You know, so I think he's likable that way. But then there's this whole other thing that gets into how tennis players earn their money other than through prize money, right? And the kind of things they promote and are associated with. And it is part of the conversation because they bring it with them onto the court. If they just, like if a person does not have anything public to do with any kind of company and in their private stock holdings, they're invested in something or whatever, I don't think that's anyone's business. I don't think it's anyone's business what you're invested in or what brands you buy or who you're kind of friends with. But when it becomes part of what you take with you onto the court or what you're promoting publicly, I think that is up for discussion when questioning someone's legacy, maybe not their career, right? But they keep talking about Roger's legacy. And a legacy is the whole person, not just one part, right? And so this is where my other criticism kind of comes in. And this has to do with his foundation and the sponsorships he's accepted and the kind of public appearances he's made and some of his associations that he has made public, right? Like if they were private, I would leave them alone. And this gets into NetJets, and it gets into his association and friendship and appearances with Bill Gates, right? And the fact that his foundation, and I have not had time to do deep research on this, but Roger Federer has a foundation that operates in some of the same areas of Africa that Bill Gates does, right? And that that gives me cause for concern. Right. And he's made public, you know, appearances and done fundraisers with him for his charities. And then he's also been sponsored by NetJets, that has many times been implicated in child trafficking. And that no one ever talks about this. Like, I don't think that we need to say, well, oh yeah, Roger is certainly involved and on board with this. Right. But the fact that it's not talked about, like that's a taboo, and it's not difficult to find these questions. And it's hard to sometimes get to the bottom because it's not talked about. Sometimes if you talk about it, you'll find out that it's either not true or the association is so limited, it's likely someone doesn't know at all. But if you're not allowed to talk about it, or no one does, then suspicion grows. And you know, you can't, at this point, it's unreasonable to say, oh, well, he didn't know, like that Bill Gates is not, it has just helping people and freedom and things like that in mind, whether or not, whatever your feelings personally about GMOs or, quaxines or whatever the fuck are, right? Like he obviously has his own agenda that he's pushing that a lot of people aren't comfortable with. And so, that's for sure, right? It can't just be stated that, oh, he's just helping everybody, right? And then the net jets thing, like I understand lots of people use private jets and not all of them are doing, immoral things, but you have to have questions about a company that creates a commercial with Roger Federer in chains dragging a jet down the runway. Right. And I mean, right. So you can't say he doesn't know these things. Right. And because he did them publicly, I think it's fair to at least question them. I don't know that it's fair to say, ha ha ha, you're guilty. Right. But a conversation about them is fair. And why we are allowed to ask questions about Novak Djokovic's affiliations and behavior, on and off the court as it relates to health related matters or this or that or whatever. If none of this, if there had not been any of this stuff around Novak Djokovic, I would have had a harder time saying that like this is reasonable to question as part of his legacy. But it will never be lived down, Novak's legacy, because of what happened with something that has nothing to do with tennis, right? With actually his play on the court. So I feel like it's a fair question. And I feel like it was fine that he didn't answer it. I knew he wouldn't, but I think it is not fine that my question was deleted. And of course, like anyone can say, well, it's not there, so we can't see that it is. But, it's just, believing or trusting me that I put it there. But, whatever it is, I would like to hear people even if it's for different reasons than I am, I would like to hear people in the tennis world who have talked about Roger Federer in any other way than strictly his on-court performance address these questions.
Well, the interesting thing to me about Roger Federer is, in relation to what you were just saying, is the fact that in my memory, I don't know, he was like the first athlete that was just openly talked about as being a billionaire. And he's a billionaire. I'm sure there are other professional athletes that are billionaires, but even if they are, they're not really discussed much, and they're not really Tiger Woods, yes.
Tiger Woods and Roger Federer got into that level at about the same time, and they developed sort of a friendship around that.
Right. And so you have these country club sports, sponsored by Rolex, right? Roger was always like the best of the best, the private jets. Whether or not he knew what was happening, I don't think initially he did. I don't sense
malice from him. I don't sense that. I think he just feels like, well, that's not what I'm doing, and so I'm just going to stay out of that. Right? But once you are in partnership with someone, you're not out of it.
But what's interesting is that why wouldn't the billionaire tennis player associate with the billionaire tech guy, right? Bill Gates? And why wouldn't he align himself with what other billionaire elites are doing? And I know that I looked into this a while back. There are companies that do legacy management. So you're a billionaire, you're an elite, and you go to this firm and they manage your legacy as you're retiring or leaving the world stage.
Yep.
They craft your legacy, which involves media, which involves press releases, and how the narrative around you and your history and your life and your work is shaped. And I don't doubt that Roger has also been using a similar firm, right? I'm sure Bill Gates probably gave him the number of a guy to call. Oh, you're retiring. You got to manage your legacy, buddy.
I mean, it's, so Bill Gates had to do a lot of legacy repair. Roger Federer has never, Roger Federer is, for mostly good reasons, universally loved and appreciated, right? And so, like, I think my guess would be that there's a way he could address this on some level that would satisfy people who have questions in some way, right? And, not have it really damage his legacy. But this idea that he is it's almost like Barack Obama. Like, you're not allowed to criticize. Now, for completely different reasons on some level, but you're not allowed to criticize. And I noticed the same obsession with Roger Federer. It's different because one's a political figure and one's an athlete and whatever. But you see people like Bill Gates is obsessed with Roger Federer, right? And it's like Anna Wintour from Vogue, like some of the people that like see him as some sort of muse or icon that they want to attach themselves to. And Robert and I did a show about this years ago, right? About this obsession that Bill Gates has with him, and then his association with Anna Wintour, the fashion icon. I think one of the things that has been so appealing about Roger Federer to a lot of people is like he's kind of the absolute peak of the metrosexual, right? Like this blending of like femininity and masculinity in a way that is very, very appealing to the elite, right? Like he's pretty, right? But he's an excellent physical tennis player, right? And whatnot. The other thing that's weird that sometimes I think, and Robert and I have talked about this as well. Robert and I used to talk about this kind of stuff a lot. Roger Federer has 2 sets of twins, right? And if you follow like the thread about how celebrities have like a disproportionately high ratio of twins compared to other people, and then the fact that he has 2 sets of twins and his twin boys actually have the same name. They're both named Leo. So it's like Leo and Lenny. So Leo and Leonard. So Leonard and Leonard, like it's weird, right? Like it's like almost perfectly setting up for the, the disappearance of one and then the playing of the one that's left by 2 different people at times, or one of those kind of conspiracies or whatever, right? But this, I think he has this kind of image that is really, really appealing to a certain type of elite. And that is like, I don't know. Robert, like I felt like Bill Gates.
Well, the British love him.
I always felt like Bill Gates had a huge crush on him.
And the Royals loved him too.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Almost everybody loves Roger Federer, right? Even people who their favorite player is Nadal or Djokovic or Murray or whatever, they all still like them. They don't have, like a lot of people who like one player, they have disdain for their main opponent. I've never heard anyone really express that towards Roger, right? And so, it's on one level, that's kind of cool. Like we all know someone in our life who's just like a very likable person, and for the most part, deserving of that, what people say about them and whatnot. But this idea that they can't be criticized is almost religious in nature. It is religious in nature.
And I think that part of that is the legacy management. It doesn't begin once you have a legacy. It starts when you're creating your legacy. And I think Federer was smart.
He started early.
Doing it.
He didn't wait till he was getting close to retirement. It started in the beginning. He doesn't speak publicly about political issues, right? Like even when he would be asked about like feng shui, he would try and get away with the one-word answer. Same with Nadal. Neither of them speak too much about political issues, even when they're asked. Different than Djokovic or Murray. Both of them are more willing to wade into the political territories. But I think that both of them have engaged in better legacy management practices from day one. Right. And Can you think of, I'm trying to think of anyone else who's super famous. I'm not talking about like protected groups or whatever. Can you think of anyone other than Barack Obama and in the sports world, Roger Federer, that you're really not allowed to criticize? That's not true of Serena Williams, even though like there's always been a lot of criticism of her, and it's always been, sort of allowed. Some people might get really mad, but it's sort of been allowed, right?
Not off the top of my head.
I don't
other than like George Washington.
But I think you're allowed to criticize George Washington, right? And I think people will say, people would say, oh, you're allowed to criticize Barack Obama. All the Republicans and right-wingers did for 8 years. What I mean is, like, that was socially frowned upon in a big way, to be questioning or critical of anything about Barack Obama's legacy or himself or his background or whatever it is, right? There's very few people, and there's not some like vast, wide public interest in Roger Federer. But what I'm saying is, in the sports world in general, and it bleeds over into pop culture, because a lot of people were never interested in tennis until Roger Federer or whatever, there is this acceptance that like he's beyond reproach. And I find that disturbing, and actually like cheapens his legacy.
Well, I mean, like Mother Teresa, Gandhi, the Dalai Lama, like these kind of figures share in a similar way. What Federer has shared is that almost universal adoration.
Yep.
Even though you are allowed to criticize and to bring up negative things or to question their motives, but it's a very, very unpopular and frowned upon activity that people just don't wade into it unless, of course, they're like you and I, and we just don't care what people think.
Right.
It's true. They have an energy about them that just commands you to give them fealty in a way. And it is kind of weird, right? Maybe Roger doesn't even understand it himself.
I'm sure he doesn't, right? Like when I look at him, the difference between Roger and almost, I can't say anything about Mother Teresa because I've never looked into her closely enough. But the others, Obama, Dalai Lama, Gandhi, if you just do a little bit of digging, there's some questionable things about their personality and their personal behavior on a regular basis. There isn't really, I've not seen much of that about Roger Federer. Like I sincerely believe, unless someone's able to show me otherwise, and if someone's able to show me otherwise, I'm happy to change my position on this, that there's truly disturbing behavior that emanates from him, right? That is like something he has actively been involved in his whole life. I think that basically, it's more other things being attached to him, and then him sort of either kind of just going along with it without a lot of questions, or at the point he realized maybe there should be questions, I've noticed he doesn't talk as much about Bill Gates as he used to, or do as many things. So maybe at a certain point he realized, oh, this is not really the best thing. And okay. But he hasn't done like a fundraiser, an appearance with him in a while. But I think it's really been more how other people have attached themselves to him, and things, crafted narratives, crafted stuff around him, and then him being like sort of okay with going along with it because he doesn't necessarily want to think about those things. I will say there's been one sort of scenario where there's been active resistance against Roger Federer, but in my opinion, it's a fake one, right? So, and I don't know if they're exactly the same or if they're different. So at one point, somebody like staged a protest like outside of like Deutsche Bank or Swiss Bank or some bank that he was involved with, also sponsored events that he was doing it, right? And they were complaining. The protest was about that this bank was not supporting green energy and shit like that, right? And then just also at the recent Laver Cup, a protester came on and lit himself on fire, right? To protest. It was like an Extinction Rebellion kind of things. So I don't know if that is just stupid people who that feels like the most important thing to them, and it's their right to believe that. I disagree. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know, whatever it is, or if that's just intentionally creating an AstroTurf protest against Roger, so that if anyone goes looking into any of his possible, not cute associations, that comes to the top of the search. And people are like, every bank is like that. So it's not a big deal, right? That kind of thing. So like there's always the faux resistance there, so that when people go looking into, is there any problem with Roger's legacy? That will just be the one mark. And obviously it's not, in my opinion, a real one, but.
Well, it's not like Roger is eating children and going to orgies and, involved. It's like, when Bono was very much, he would do all of these good works, but then, he'd get caught in a hot tub with some questionable women or under their
Roger, there's never been anything like that I'm aware of with Roger Federer. Like I saw somebody had posted some home videos. They ran into Roger at like a local ski competition in Switzerland, where he was just there watching, right? And they asked him questions and he let them record them. And it was all very like, he was just doing a normal thing and that things were normal. And like, like those are the only kinds of like unorchestrated sort of videos or appearance or footage or whatever that ever comes out with him. It's always like, oh, Roger Federer made this fan's day. And there's, grassroots film to prove it, not just the one that, Sports Illustrated or TMZ or whatever took. It's like somebody has it on their phone, right? He's, like I said, I don't like, if somebody's able to present me something else, I'm happy to switch my position if it makes sense to me. But he seems to me like a genuinely likable, nice, decent person. And I think we are doing him a disservice by not being honest about the fact that, there's some things there that aren't cute. And that's it, right?
I think,
too.
Roger seems to me like a lot of these guys, a lot of famous people, whether they're actors or athletes, they get used. They get
totally.
It's like the gods are interested in the Titans.
That's the whole point of my Bill Gates Federer connection. My Larry Ellison Nadal thing, even to a certain extent, Elon Musk Novak Djokovic, although it's a little different based on just the different personalities of those two, and then to a lesser extent the Bezos Murray connection, right? That's the whole point of what I'm saying, is exactly what you're talking about.
And if you look back in history, right, before we really had like professional athletes that could help shape culture and carry narratives, you had the great artists and musicians, and they always had patrons who recognized their talent and supported them financially and encouraged them to create and to be the best that they could be. And then they, in turn, like fed off of that energy that they created, right? Because then they would use them and attach things with them that maybe they didn't agree with or really know what was going on. Or even
if they agree with them, it's because the way it was presented to them was not completely honest, and that there's a way you can present certain things, particularly like when you're dealing with things around health measures. There's a way you can present it that someone who's an athlete, not a doctor, or someone who researches health, will be like, okay, like that sounds like it's helpful, fine, go ahead, right? So and they know that people who are solely focused on their art, their craft, or their sport do not have time to avail themselves of all the white papers about everything.
So if Roger Federer takes his medicine, how many other people are going to take their medicine too?
There's also no evidence that Roger Federer takes medicine, because he was also out the whole time that was a question or a controversy. So is Serena Williams. Isn't that interesting?
And he hasn't played in any tournament yet that Novak Djokovic hasn't also been able to play in.
Correct.
So we don't really know. You're right.
We don't know, right?
We never will, because he retired.
Right. We never will. And right. So yeah. So anywho, okay, I think that's enough on Roger. Let's sort of move on. So we had major, we had the US Open. And it was actually, I felt like it was really exciting tournament. Like I felt like there were some of the best matches I've seen in a really long time.
Yeah, I think when you remove two of the big three, and then you have Rafa going out fairly early on, it's amazing how much the entire thing changes, right? When you see that it was wide open for so many guys to win it this time for the first time ever. So
Yeah, I don't have too much to say about Rafa. It felt like he was obviously injured and obviously something was going on with his wife and a pregnancy complication. And so like this wasn't I just it was kind of very flat performance, but it didn't there was not some drama around it in my opinion. Um I just felt like all the matches were really good. There was almost no like short like rollover matches of any consequence.
Yeah, I mean everyone played really really well, especially the younger guys coming up. A lot of exciting matches, like just probably some of the best shot making I've seen in a long
There's even
time.
great women's matches, which I'm really not too fond of women's tennis at this point for a variety of reasons. But I enjoyed some of the matches. I think I have a couple of topics related to U.S. Open around people and then just sort of issues that I wanted to get to. But I just wanted to address that I thought it was a fantastic tournament. Like it really was fun to watch.
Yeah, and who was the one woman that won the women's title? What was her name?
Iga Swiatek.
No, no, no. I'm thinking of
You're thinking of Wimbledon.
No, I'm thinking of the U.S. Open of. It was a French woman, wasn't it? There was a French woman that went pretty far. She was an older lady. She was in her 30s.
Oh, Alizé Cornet.
Anyway,
Alizé Cornet.
it might be, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, obviously, like the big story anyway of the first week was the Serena's retirement. And I have to say that the way Serena presented at this tournament really, I enjoyed watching her. I enjoyed watching her at Wimbledon, even though she went out in the first round. I thought it was an entertaining match. But I thought it was kind of like, wow, that's pretty ballsy to show up in that shitty of shape and think that you're going to win. But she obviously had, even though she didn't play well over the summer, put in some work, and it was a different story by the time she got there. And I mean, she beat the number 2 ranked the player in the world, in Annette Kontaveit, in the second round. And it was a tremendous match. And then even though she ended up losing to Ajla Tomljanovic in the third round, that was one of the best and most like entertaining. I mean, obviously, like she wasn't at the peak of her dominant powers, but she was playing great tennis. And she was like watching her play like she was Rafael Nadal. She was playing every point like it was match point. She saved like something like 8 or 10 match points. And the very last match of her career was the longest match of her career. And I think that is, I mean, that's a glorious way to go out. If you can't go out on top, you can't go out winning. That way that she went out, like, and I felt like she handled herself really in a cool way all week. She seemed to be enjoying it, appreciating being there, and really playing some good tennis and not wanting to let that last moment go. And, you know, there's been questions sometimes over the years about what her interest level was still in tennis or this or that, or what she was really doing. But nobody, like, especially nobody who is not in the kind of prime shape of other people, puts themselves through the kind of suffering she did in that last set when she was saving all those points, unless they love it. Right. And so I have to say that I've been critical for a variety of reasons of her over the years. Sometimes I enjoy watching her. I've rooted for her many times in her career, but I really enjoyed watching her at the US Open, and I thought it was kind of cool. The behavior of everyone else around her, I'm not going to talk about at this moment. Right. I haven't heard, you know, the same celebration of her legacy going on. Like there was a celebration there at the tournament because she played. But this obsession seems to be different. Like it's a more in-person obsession with Serena, whereas this Roger thing is this more like everybody talking about it and creating videos and blah, 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 right? I liked the celebration for her better than I liked the celebration for Roger, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't think they made a huge big deal about it.
It was appropriate for who she was.
And it was great for Ajla Tomljanovic, who it's just been a grinder, but you know, that win I think has helped her gain confidence in herself, right? Because Serena was playing well. So it's not like she just beat an old aging Serena that was past her prime.
Well, and I think
it's funny that both Serena and Roger retired in the same year, and both going out on kind of like a low note where they just going out on a loss. Roger was in a doubles
and the Queen
match.
died between their retirements, and I think there's a lot
Right.
of symbology in that. I think that I would love to, if I could find someone who really understands the esoterics of some of that stuff, to do a dig on that, sort of separate from anything really about tennis, just in terms of more like royalty and social status and symbolism. What was I going to say? Isla Tomljanovic. I feel like that was the best person for Serena to end on, because Serena respects her. She's not a person who creates drama. She just plays every point as well as she can. And so there was no, and she was super respectful of the way she handled Serena and the way Serena handled her, and the whatever, like the whole thing, it was perfect. It was really good for both of them and for tennis in general. Right. And so I felt like that was cool. That was a cool part.
And Isla, interestingly enough, is that Tennis Channel picked to do the My Tennis Life for the Tennis Channel, along with JJ Wolf as the male that they picked for the male tennis player. So also very interesting.
Yep, absolutely. So I thought that was cool. I liked Isla Tomljanovic's. She had a shirt when she was being interviewed after her win. They didn't interview her till the next day, like at the ESPN stage set. But she had a coffee cup that said AM and a whiskey cup that said PM. And I was with her on that, right? So the next thing, obviously, like the Carlos Alcaraz, right? The crowning of the king or the queen, however you think about it, right? And he played some great matches. Like his match against Sinner and Tiafoe were amazing. I think the Rude match, while not terrible, was anticlimactic at the end. But there's nothing not to like about Carlos Alcaraz. He seems to be a nice kid. He's completely like athletic and has all the skills. It's kind of exciting to have. I don't think he's ever going to be like dominant in the way Federer, Nadal, Djokovic, or even Murray were dominant week to week. I think he's going to sort of peak at the big moments, right? And then, sometimes go out in the first or second round and it's not a big deal.
Well, he's gotten wins over both Nadal and Djokovic. Mm-hmm. I don't think he's ever been able to play Federer.
No, that was his biggest wish, is to get to play Federer. But, I'm sure he'll have a tour or like an exhibition performance with him, because that will be good for, popularity of tennis.
It's like he's just this new guy who's got this raw talent, very, very likable. I definitely see a lot of the Federer characteristics that we were talking about.
His game is more Federer-like than it is Nadal or Djokovic-like, just in terms of the shot-making ability, right? The flashy shots and the variety. So I think that, but he's kind of like, he has some elements of all three of them, but I'd say maybe game style closer to Federer than the others. I do want a hat tip to Robert Phoenix, if people remember in the short special that he did with us about Carlos Alcaraz a few months back, when we were looking at the Queen programming, right? Which stopped after we did that show. They stopped playing all that stuff, and it was kind of interesting. But in almost every tournament he has played since then, he has had some fall where it looked like he rolled his ankle, but he was okay. And in both the French Open and at Wimbledon, he unexpectedly lost to someone who went on to have a serious issue. Zverev broke his ankle in a way that has him out for a really long time. And at Wimbledon, Sinner beat him, and then in the next match rolled his ankle. He turned out to be okay, but for a second, he was on the ground for a while. It looked like it wasn't going to be good. He ended up being okay. And Robert had said, I think this guy is going to have problems with his ankles. And in that same episode, you talked about Carlos seems to be able to anticipate where to be and where not to be. So had he made either of those next rounds, those could have been him. And he has twisted his ankle in some way, but, his strength or whatever has seemed to be able to, he doesn't get hurt, flexible and strong and whatever. So good call, Robert. It's been kind of fascinating. Every time he fucking rolls his ankle, I'm like, hot damn, Robert. So
Yeah,
that was interesting.
I think that like you were saying about Carlos is not going to be this player that nobody can beat.
Right. I don't think
He's
he.
already been beat by some of the younger players. So, but he does show the ability to continue to get better and to sharpen his skills. Every loss that he takes, he comes back and he wins several more matches,
Yeah.
right? And you can just see the improvements in a short period of time.
Well,
So
and he has a level of athleticism at 19 that only Djokovic and Nadal have really displayed in the highest level of tennis. And for them, it came like a little bit later, right? At least Nadal kind of always had it, but he hadn't developed his game and skill as early as Carlos had, right? Like this guy looks like an athlete, and his ability to use his endurance to outlast people and all of that kind of stuff is impressive at 19.
And what we saw in the US Open, I think we saw the culmination of all of that work that we started watching the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
And, it was well deserved. From the last US Open, his performance there,
Yep.
where he kind of got everyone's attention. It was like, oh, who's this kid?
Yep.
And now he's won it only a year later. And you can see the improvement of all of the other players around him, right? Because they know they're not chasing Djokovic. They're not chasing Nadal anymore. They're chasing this guy.
Yeah.
They're chasing Medvedev. And you can see the improvement in all of the other players as well. And like, that's what I thought was great about this US Open was
I think one of, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, not only Alcaraz, but all of the other, like you wanted to talk about Francis Tiafoe. I mean, come on, this guy just out of nowhere, why hasn't he been able to do this more consistently?
So I want to talk about Tiafoe in a second, but I just want to say a final thing about Alcaraz. One of the things I hope happens as a result of Alcaraz's presence and the people now going to be chasing him that didn't happen in the way that when Nadal came along that I thought it should have, is that they really take like super athleticism and physical fitness very, very seriously, right? That to me has always been a quandary about tennis, is why some of the players don't even really look like athletes. Like some of them do for sure, but the level of fitness that Carlos Alcaraz displays, I think is obviously he has some genetics and stuff that not everybody has, but I hope he sets a bar that other people try to move towards in terms of really paying attention to that on every level as a way to advance their game, right? And you're already seeing it a bit with Francis Tiafoe and Tommy Paul, who are both more like, super fit than they used to be, and some other players as well. But yeah, so let's move on to Tiafoe. Your thoughts? You started. I want to let you finish before I say mine.
I thought that, his level of play, I think, has started to get much better ever since the clay court season where he made the final. And he ended up, I think did he win a final on clay or did he lose? I can't remember if he won or lost, but I know that he was playing really well.
I think he lost in Portugal in the final. I think he was tired. Like he had come from another tournament the week before where he'd made the final. Yeah.
And so I thought he played great there. He struggled a little bit after that, but then, he started to make a turnaround in the hard court season. And, his performance at the US Open, I mean, what can I say? I mean, he's just, his shot making was incredible. His movement around the court was so much better. His energy was there. He was playing some fairly long matches. So, yeah, and to see him continue to play well at the Laver Cup after, and I'm hoping that he keeps it up. It sounds like it's his own doing, really, because I think he wasn't as focused on his tennis as he should have been if he really wanted to play at that level.
Well, I think I've been watching him for a number of years, and he has always had flashes of brilliance. He has always been considered somewhat like, I remember, I can't remember if it was in 2019, he took Tsitsipas out at Wimbledon when he was having a great year, right? He's always been able to, he likes playing the big stage. He likes the Grand Slam, center court kind of thing, right? He likes a lot of attention on that. He's a very flashy player, and he has a little bit of an interesting skill set that can propose certain problems for people. But yeah, I think he didn't take his mental seriously or his physical fitness super seriously. And I think that was confusing to people because he's always looked fit. Like he just has those genetics that he looks fit. But I've known lots of people like that my whole life. Like some of the people with the best bodies I ever saw in gymnastics had like almost no endurance or physical fitness. That was just their natural genetics. So I think you looked at him always and you're like, wow, he looks like a stunning athlete. What's the problem? But it's different. You know, it's different than actually having that endurance. And then the wherewithal to stay in the game mentally for long matches, I think used to sort of evade him. He would kind of be hot and cold. But I know he got, you know, he added a new coach last year, and that seems to have helped, and he takes himself more seriously. And I thought he had a great, really most of the year was pretty good. He had a few dips, but he was fantastic at the US Open. And I think it was the best thing for him that he did not win that match with Alcaraz, because that was the first time I ever saw him fight like that. Like you could see he was tired and he had gotten lost for a set or two in the match, right? But he did not want to let it go, right? And, you know, he ended up taking it all, you know, taking it to a very lengthy 5-set sort of match. And I was afraid that after that, his performance was going to dip, but he didn't. He showed up a little slow at Laver Cup, but then ultimately came through in really important ways. And yes, that's an exhibition, but that fighting to the end, even though you knew probably at a certain point you weren't going to win, but it was like all about playing every point like it was match point. Like that's the Nadal shit. That's the shit that whatever anybody thinks of Nadal, whether they like him or don't like him, think he's boring, thinks he cheats, thinks he takes steroids, whatever the fuck they think, there's no question that the guy plays every point like it's match point unless he can't move, right? And you saw that. And he's the one who took Nadal out, right? And he had said before, he's like, I'm going to match him point for point. I'm going to stay in every point like he does, right? And I think if he can add that element to his game, he's going to be a factor. I don't think he'll ever be like a super dominant player in terms of like winning everything, but I think he's going to challenge quite a bit, you know, on hard court and grass. And I think he's going to upset a lot of big players. And I think he might win one or two. And I think he's great for the sport. I think he's fun. Right. I think he's like, feels like an everyday person. He doesn't feel like he was, and we know for sure, unless the story is completely concocted, but I don't get the sense that it is, that he does not come from the country club, right? He comes from the gym.
Well, I know the only thing I really know about him is that he's a Maryland guy.
Yeah.
And so he's from my neck of the woods. And, you know, I think he could be one of those guys that always does really well at the US Open and in the hard courts and really poses challenges to the top guys. You know, a lot of really good American players coming out. I mean, we got Taylor Fritz, the grandson of a billionaire. We've got Francis Tiafoe, and Riley Opelka is somewhere in there. But, you know, you got Jack Sock, and you've got, you mentioned him earlier.
Tommy Paul is great.
Tommy Paul.
I mean, obviously,
it's a clique of them, right?
There's
They're
a bunch of them. Yeah, and there's a few others as well. This is the best American. I just saw that there's going to be an American tennis exhibition down in San Antonio in November with the top 10 American players, and like I actually think people will go, like because you know, like there's American Tommy Paul. I mean, Taylor Fritz is in the top 10 now. Right. And there's like 10 Americans in the top 50 or something like that. Like this is the best that American tennis has been since like Andre Agassi and Pete Sampras, Jim Courier time period. Right. So that's interesting. But it was exciting with Francis Tiafoe. I want to say one more thing about the US Open, and I'm not going to go into details about it here. If we end up doing a bonus piece for Rockfin, I'll go further into it there because I think there's some disturbing things there. But Novak Djokovic wasn't there, and we all know why, so I'm not going to go into that, right, per se. but I find it fascinating that the US Open chose not to fight for Novak, which they could have. They made a statement saying they weren't going to. They were just going to go along with the CDC. And on some level, it's like, okay, if we're having nonsense, it's equal nonsense for everybody. If other people can't get in, why should he be able to? So, okay. But they didn't fight for him, even though he's, won it several times and is, longest number one in the world ever. And that not only was the US Open sponsored by Moderna, but Billie Jean King is now a spokesperson for Moderna. And it's the Billie Jean King Tennis Center. And I'm just telling you right now, that is, if anybody were paying attention, and some people were, a lot of the tennis fans are not down with all of this stuff, right? There's a lot of Djokovic fans, but there's also a lot of tennis fans who are healthy people. And they're just like, well, I'm not necessarily against it, but this is like pharmaceutical porn, right? Like the way this is going. And I think that is something that should be discussed more. Like, I'm disturbed. You and I have talked about the overwhelming presence of pharmaceutical sponsorship with tennis. That doesn't make sense to me. Like, it's gross. But in this particular situation, right, of course, they're not going to fight for Novak Djokovic. And I don't even know if they should. I don't know how I feel about fighting for privileged people, whatever it is. But the point of the matter is Novak wasn't there, but Moderna and Billie Jean King, and it's kind of interesting, her name. And if we do a bonus segment on Rockfin, I'll talk about it. But anyway, so yeah, go ahead.
The interesting thing, though, is that by focusing so much on Novak and what happened in Australia and, subsequent at the US Open, it makes you think, and tennis fans at large think, that he's the only holdout, right? But it doesn't really answer that question, because there could be players at this point who just avoided it or didn't do it, but they're not as well known. They're not as in the spotlight. That is true. And nobody's talking about
that. That is true. There's at least 6 or 7 players who play at all the Grand Slams anyway, who are just not well known. They might be doubles players or ranked really low, or they're just in qualifiers or whatever, who haven't been. And some of them, if you're American, then you don't need it to get in at this point and whatever. But we don't know the status of the Williams sisters or of Roger Federer, because they just avoided the whole thing, right? And then there's only criticism of Tennis Sandgren, because he also got in trouble a couple years back for, somehow not, I don't even know if he was a Trump supporter, but he wasn't like vocally anti anybody who liked Trump. And then nobody seems to care about Jeremy Chardy. Nobody talks about him, and nobody seems to care about him, who was injured after the first, got a vaccine injury after the first one, and has not been able to play since then, and has said that he really regrets having done it, right? And nobody seems to care about him, even though he's been a top 30 player at times. He's beaten Roger Federer. He's beaten a lot of the top players, right? And he was a top doubles player, I think, as well. Nobody cares about him.
If you're also one of the top players, and you have millions, if not billions of dollars, and you have connections to powerful elites.
I'm sure that's a thing that's going on. And if we start diving into that, then that's a rabbit hole we'll never get out of. But yes, I agree with you.
But my point is that they choose, I'm just showcasing that Djokovic was chosen and being used as the scapegoat for a group of people who may be among many of the tennis professionals that have the same outlook, and yet they're not being ridiculed in the press. They're not being made an example of. And it leads you to believe that he's the only one causing any problems or, taking a stance of any kind.
To be fair, he's the only one who's made sort of overt public statements, right? Anyone who has a fame level who's made overt public statements, and he had gotten himself into that trouble with the Adria Tour and whatnot. But still, the way, even people who disagree with Novak at this point, like they'll talk about how they think it's like psychopathic the way Ben Roethlisberger goes after him. And it is gross. It's disgusting, right?
Yeah.
We wouldn't accept that for anything else. It's the complete opposite of the treatment of Roger Federer. You're not allowed to question Roger Federer. You can like say anything you want about Novak Djokovic. It's just like the Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton paradigm or the Barack Obama, Hillary Trump paradigm, that like one, you're not really allowed to do anything but praise, and the other, you can say the most disgusting things about them, true or not, and it's all good, right? So
you just can't like them.
Right. So yeah, right. There you go. Or if you like them, you must support genocide or some shit like that, right? Even though it's exactly the opposite. Okay. So then let's just briefly touch on Laver Cup. I don't want to go too much into like, the individual stories. We're getting kind of tight. If we want to do a bonus segment, we might have to do it a different time. I just see it as it was a celebration of Roger's career for sure. It was that party. And I think it marked the end of the big 3/4 dominance of tennis. And I think that's a really good thing for the sport at this point. Like, I think that helped tennis rise. This is the first time that all of the big four, so that includes Andy Murray, who was part of that mix until he got so many injuries. They were all there. They were all on the same team, and they got beat for the first time. Europe has always won the world. It's always been Europe against the world. The world won. After everybody was like, oh my God, this is going to be amazing because it's the big four are there. And I also think that what has happened since then, right? Because that kind of brought Novak back into the fold after not being able to play all summer. I don't consider Novak part of that anymore. I think the big 3/4 thing is dead, but I don't think it means that Novak is dead. I think Novak is going to continue at that level for some time, but I think tennis is moving on from that paradigm. I think Novak will continue to contend and win at least 1 or 2 Grand Slams a year for the next probably 3 to 5 years at least. And that will be his own legacy. I don't think he has to be attached to the others anymore. And I think it's a good thing. I don't think that reality cares about him. And I think he belongs with the others, right? I think that like in some small way, his heart has to have been with the world, right? Against the, it's the underdog type of thing. I think his legacy will be all of his own because he was never granted the same benefit of the doubt or respect as the others.
Yeah, I'm actually, it's good that he went to the Laver Cup because I don't know, there was some question of whether or not he had sustained some type of injury to his wrist. And they're always questioning, is Novak going to be able to, just hyping it up, but it was good to see him there supporting all of these other guys. And the thing with the Laver Cup for me, it's like, okay, it's the red versus the blue, the world versus Europe.
It's the truth.
And then
it's the truth.
right? And who's the red team? It's the Americans. It's that loudmouth McEnroe versus like Federer and Bjorn Borg.
Right.
This rival between McEnroe and Bjorg has just been like hyped for so long. And they even made a movie about it that I tried to watch recently. And so here you have McEnroe beating Bjorg for the first time in a Laver Cup deal, right? Now he's only just coaching, but it's still very symbolic. Like when McEnroe beat Bjorn Borg in Wimbledon, it signaled like Bjorn Borg just sort of went away from tennis shortly after that. McEnroe just proceeded to have this amazing career, right? I think he still holds a record for the most titles won in a single year. So, I mean, he went on a winning spree.
He still plays reasonably well. He still plays on the Legends Tour with like people way younger than him, like Andy Roddick and Marty Fish and James Blake and whatever. And, he doesn't necessarily win super frequently, but the games or the matches are not uncompetitive, right? He's still pretty good.
Yeah. So it was
like Martina Navratilova. Like Martina played doubles into her 40s or 50s, I think into her 50s. She won the U.S. Open with like Bob Bryan and like in like 2000 and not that long ago, right? So yeah, but I mean, both of them were really highly dedicated to fitness as well, right? So I'm sorry, go ahead. I interrupted.
And yeah, you just see the fall of Europe, the fall of the dominance of Rafael Nadal, Roger Federer, Andy Murray. I don't want to even put him in that category, but he was an elite player that could play at their level and beat them in the big tournaments. So credit to Andy Murray. He's got a metal hip.
Yep.
Federer's on his third knee surgery and is retiring. Rafa's body is starting to let him down and fall apart.
Rafa's body's always been falling apart. That's been a constant through his career, managing that. Yeah, I don't like it. You know, he had a great year. We should, you know, it should be celebrated that he was able to pull off what he did at this point in his career. But like, it's definitely very uncertain going forward, for sure.
And there was even questions of Djokovic being possibly injured. But other than that, they talk about his lack of match play, right? Like as if that's equivalent to these other guys' hindrance and injuries. So there was an aging Europe team and a young American world team, which America is the world. I'm sorry, but like, how did that even get decided, right?
Well, I think it was just, I mean, this is all a Rod Laver. This event was created by Rod Laver and Roger Federer. Well, it's Team 8. It's Tony Godsick and Roger Federer. That's the agency. And then they did it in honor of Rod Laver. And of course it's going to be that way, right? Like, this goes along with the whole image of Roger Federer. And, I don't know what people believe, but, I still think with most world affairs, what we're really dealing with is British Empire, right? Kind of thing. And everything else is sort of subservient to that. And for people who think that it's a United States dominant world, I have news for you. It's just like they're just the muscle behind the other thing, right? It's just that, it's not a true in charge of things, even though they like to make you think that.
They had a Canadian and an Australian there.
They had a Canadian, an Australian, and an Argentinian.
Yes.
Right. And Nick Kyrgios would normally have been there, but he chose not to because he wanted to go home for a little bit, which is reasonable. He'd been gone for a long time and he'd had a run like he's never had before. Yeah, I mean, it's just, it seemed like what's funny is I got this one wrong. Like I had left a comment somewhere that like, this format is boring. Like you need to change it up because, there's just always been far more highly ranked tennis players in Europe than anywhere else. So it's kind of like, it was like the Roger Federer against Andy Roddick thing, right? It's like not very competitive. I was wrong, right? Like these guys really, things have leveled out a lot more than I thought, but I think it would be more interesting to like let the team captains pick their teams and not have it be everything a geographical war, right? Why not mix it up a little bit like it's a fucking drinking game and have a good time?
Yeah, because I mean it's all just exhibition, right? There's no points.
No points.
But they still play like it's for everything, right? That's what I saw.
It's Roger's event because it's Roger Federer's event. That the big thing being talked about is Roger Federer is going to continue to play. He's just only going to play at the exhibition level, right? And so these players are going to be now more interested in playing exhibitions than they've ever been because everybody does what God says. And Roger's agent is literally named Tony Godsick, right? So there you go. The sick gods. Okay, are we good to move on from Laver Cup? Okay, yeah. So the last two things I want to hit here is just like the early fall tennis has been really interesting, both for like Novak really showing that he's still like he's won both tournaments he's in and he's going to play in Paris next week, and he won that last year after he sort of evened it out with Medvedev, who had beaten him at the U.S. Open last year. So he looks to be in good form. Medvedev looks to be playing better than he's played all year. Americans are doing well. Lots of interest, and there's been a lot of really good early fall tennis play. That's pretty much all I have to say about that. Sometimes it gets pretty boring after the U.S. Open, but this has been pretty good. You?
Yeah, I think watching JJ Wolf just recently in Italy, in Florence, and he made it to the final, his first ever ATP final. It was a 250 event, but the way he was playing and the people that he beat in that tournament, tells me a lot. I've been watching this guy
until this year, he'd never won a match outside of the United States at the tour level.
Right. So he's been due for a breakout. I mean, he had a double hernia surgery. Then something happened. He was in a car accident, like right after one of his surgeries. There's a lot of, he's from a sporting family, much like Sebastian Corda, right? So he has brothers and sisters that are all in some type of sport, tennis or football. So he has a well-rounded sports background, and he knows competition. He's no stranger to competing and being in front of fans. And so I think he has what it takes. He has the swagger that it takes to play at a high level. And I think he has the determination to his fitness and improving his game. So it's been great to watch him. And he's kind of outside of this clique of Americans that are playing really well. He's his own man. He's got his own posse that he travels with. He identifies a lot with Andre Agassi, so he's kind of a wild child rebel.
He had a mullet until recently, just like Andre Agassi. So he was most famous for his mullet, right?
Yeah, they told him it would be a good PR thing if he would cut it off, so he did. But
so I think I think PR-wise, just it was taking focus away from his tennis. I don't think it was like, yeah, it was kind of funny and whatnot. But here's my thoughts on JJ Wolf. So I think he is going to be outside of your normal strain. I think he's going to be kind of like a Cam Norrie in terms of like, Cam Norrie he competes for Great Britain, but you don't hear him talked about in the same way you hear like Andy Murray or Jack Draper or Emma Raducanu, because he's kind of a world transplant in some ways, but he played college tennis. And so did JJ Wolf. JJ Wolf had a very winning college tennis career, as did like John Isner. But I think JJ Wolf's going to be a little different than that. Right. I think he's going to be more like Cam Norrie. He's kind of separate than the rest of the clique. His game is really interesting. Like I was looking it up, like, how do you classify his game? Right. Like, what would you consider his play style? Because he's not really a baseliner. He's not a serve and volleyer. Like, he's incredibly dynamic and powerful, but he's not huge. He's like 6 feet. Right. He's got a serve with a lot of action on it. And if you watch him when he's playing, and I appreciate this, and when he's being interviewed and whatnot, he never stops moving. There's a lot of swing, like just a lot of motion in general to his play. And it's a kind of unique, eclectic set of skills that he's kind of put together. And then he has a good personality. And yeah, like I think, I don't know if his narrative is going to be highly co-opted. Like, I don't know. It could be, right? I'm always suspicious of that kind of stuff, but he seems to be driven by a slightly different spark than some of the others, right? There's something different about him. He got my attention right away with just his motion. It's like he's responding to a different frequency or different music than everyone else. But it's not an unappealing one. Like, the difference I'd say between him and Cam Norrie is Cam Norrie's tennis is ugly to watch, even though he's very good. And JJ Wolf's is not. It's exciting and dynamic and fun to watch, but it's unclassifiable as to what style of player he really is. And the fact that like he has got his own look and his own style of clothes that he wears and things like that. Like, I just, this is going to be an interesting one to watch to see what happens and where it goes with him. But I like him a lot.
Yeah, I think if he stays healthy, he's going to be in the top 50 at least after that final. Yeah, I think he'll probably break into the top 50. And if he keeps playing that well through next year, I mean,
yeah,
I think it was Indian Wells. It was either Indian Wells or Miami, but he had one of the best shots where he actually made a left-handed forehand because he made a decision to just go to the forehand because he practices sometimes left-handed.
Well, I think he's highly coordinated. I think that's the underlying thing and I've known gymnasts like this as well, that just have this amazing coordination level. And I think maybe if we have to say that there's one underlying descriptor of his tennis is that the coordination level is super high.
I was going to say he's built like a male gymnast or a wrestler. Mm-hmm. Right, like an actual wrestler, Greco-Roman, not like a high school wrestling.
Has a lot more control over the movement of his body in some ways. Like Djokovic does too, but it's different. Djokovic's thing is predicated on like flexibility and coordination, where JJ Wolf's is predicated on like explosive power and coordination, right? And kind of thing. It's interesting. I'm excited to see how it unfolds.
And I would love to see him face off against Djokovic, because Djokovic has been playing extremely well.
The wolf versus the wolf, the Serbian wolf versus the American wolf, hungry like the wolf.
If he keeps playing and he gets deeper into these tournaments, especially ones that Djokovic is going to be in, it's very likely that we could see a wolf versus wolf matchup. So I'm looking forward to that.
Wolf fight. I like it. All right. So the last thing for me in this regular segment is I want to talk a little bit about Iga Swiatek, apparently, but Laura calls her Iga Swiatek, and I like that better. I'm going to be straight up honest, so that I'm not pretending to be impartial here. I do not like Iga Swiatek, and it's for a variety of reasons. But I'm mostly going to say this, and then you can say whatever you want. I am very disturbed about the idea that someone who is ranked number 1 in the world finds it necessary to use very cheap tactics that, if not outright, are cheating, border on cheating, to distract players who are a much lower level than she is. It's not like, I'm not even saying this would be okay then, right? But okay, like one could say you could bring that kind of tactic in a battle with someone where it's like neck and neck and you're number 1 and they're number 2 or vice versa. But like she's using these tactics against people that are many, many rankings below her. And what she's doing is she's doing some like weird arm flailing, tap dancing, jumping jack move when she is, down a little bit in a set. Sometimes she did it against Lauren Davis at the US Open, and she just did it against Donna Vekic in San Diego. And it just kind of like, to me, it's gross. Now, I wouldn't be being, I'm already I don't like her. Like, I don't like her play style. She's really good. Like, I can't take that away from her. Skilled, talented, number 1 in the world, all that stuff. I don't like her play style. I don't like this sort of attitude that she has. And I'm not interested in hearing from a 21-year-old about what our feelings about politics around the world should be, right? It's kind of at all. Like, it's not a cute look. It's not a good look. And those are but I'm just being straight up honest. But whether or not, so I'm already predisposed not to like her when this thing happened twice now with the jumping jack. I think it's gross. Like you would not ever see Djokovic, Federer, Nadal do anything like that.
She's got a temper as well. She gets very frustrated. I think there's several things going on with her. I think she finds herself in a place where a couple of years ago I thought she could get to. But, to be at the top, to have all of these expectations, constant demand for interviews and media attention, there's already a narrative being spun around her, right? Her legacy is being written. And I don't know how much input she's really wants to have on it. I mean, to me, she seems like a blank slate. She's young, she's impressionable. She's got people around her telling her what to say, what endorsements to take. She probably just wants to play tennis. And the rest of it, she leaves up to other people. So she kind of comes out a little bit uninteresting, a little bit flat, kind of boring, sort of plain. Who is this woman? Where's the personality? Like Serena had a personality.
Right. I mean,
whatever you think of her, she has like her own unique energy to her. Iga is just kind of like a placeholder.
She to me, like, there's nothing to grab onto. I don't think I don't think that there's public interest really in her. I think they're trying to push her hard, right? Like, I don't think that there's all these demands for her. I think tennis is trying to push her forward. I think they're trying to raise the WTA up to the level of the ATP. And it ain't going to happen with her. Like, the best opportunity, like it was high when it was like Capriati, Serena Williams, Maria Sharapova or whatever, but there just hasn't been that kind of personality to be marketable. She is not marketable. And what is developing of her personality is not attractive. She has this sports psychologist that she is always in her box traveling with her. And it feels like this is more like a cult leader, a mind control programmer, like this way that she tracks around the horse, just like totally focused and never like not engaging with the audience or just looking. I don't know. It definitely doesn't work for me. And, you know, when you have a young player, like, I don't like the mixing of politics and athletics, right? Because athletics is something we should all be able to kick back and enjoy together, despite what we think about everything else. But it's already happened and it's not going back. By the time somebody is a little bit older, they can have developed a perspective through some experience, even if they're misinformed or wrong. But teenagers, 19, anywhere before 25, I don't think you actually really know what's going on in the world. You don't have enough experience, right? Alexander Davidovich Fokina, he speaks out for adopted animals. Like, he has started a foundation to find animals that don't have a home to go to people who were lonely during COVID. Like, do that, right? Like, do that. That's everybody. That's a noble cause. Everyone can appreciate that or whatever. But to have people, little kids, speaking about health concerns and politics and all of this kind of shit, it's like, shut up, dude, right? But it just, I don't want to watch any match that she's in. It just is not enjoyable for me to watch. And I say that with full respect of the fact that, like, she's really good. She's really good, but it's not fun to watch. There's like lots of, I mean, I have lots of gymnasts like that they're good. Like, technically they deserve the score they're getting, but I don't enjoy watching it. I don't enjoy watching her. And I'm just being honest. It's like the whole thing is a turnoff for me. I don't think this is going to help women's tennis at all.
Well, Serena retiring and Ash Barty retiring before Serena, you know, just leaving sort of a vacuum. I think women's tennis is going to change, and I don't think Iga is going to be at the top.
I don't think so
for that long. I think that there are people, even in the tournament, even in the U.S. Open, you know, there were some women who were playing very well. I don't think she's going to be able to hold this level for too long. She's either she looks super focused and determined, or she looks just angry,
miserable. Yeah,
but there's no joy.
When she first won the French Open in 2020, it looked joyful. Like, I was like, oh, okay, this guy, I've never heard of this girl before. This is cute and whatever. But that's all gone.
Yeah, it's just all work and no play, right? It's just, and you see some of these other players out there that they win, they're focused. Djokovic, you can tell the joy when he wins. You can see the relief, right? You know, he's trying to hold it together, to be determined during the match, but afterwards, Iga's just like, you know,
a mind controlled bot. That's just what it is. All right.
It would seem so.
But I, you know, like so there's part of me that is like, if someone, I left a bad comment about her, and someone is, and people are kind of making fun of, like, wow, you really dislike her. And I was like, yeah, and I'm clear on that. Like, I'm not trying to pretend I'm a neutral voice on that. Right. Like, she just rubs me the wrong way. Okay. So I think this kind of wraps up this part. I think we can do a quick little bonus segment that will just be available in the version of this that goes up on Rockfin, because I think we're going to wade into choppy waters for a minute. So if you would like to hear the most conspiratorial part of the show, the most occulted aspect of the tennis, in this case anyway, that's not how I really see the occult tennis, but we'll be over at rockfin.com/Emily Moyer to sort of update the idea of a previously titled episode that was the Oracle of Indian Wells. Eric, any final words?
No.
All right. You can find him at Esoteric Journey. I'll see you later. Bye. We'll be back at some other point later to talk more about tennis. Bye.